We don't know specific to these children, but in the national history, what we do know is that many of these children likely died in preventable ways. These residential schools, as we call them, that are more akin to re-education camps, operated in Canada between the 1870s, and the last one closed in 1996. As early as 1907, the Government of Canada's own public health officer linked the unequal provision of healthcare to Indigenous children in the schools to prolific death rates of 25 to 50% per year, owing to that unequal health and poor health practices. He pled with the Canadian government to address the problem. The Canadian government chose not to do it, and it was leaked to the media. So we had headlines like children dying like flies, absolute inattention to the bare necessities of health. One lawyer back then actually said that Canada brought itself an unpleasant nearness with manslaughter. So this was well known back then. The Government of Canada, throughout the ages of residential schools, had whistleblowers come forward, say that children were being abused, they were dying, and Canada repeatedly chose not to help the kids.
So who do you think should be held to account?
I think both the churches and the Government of Canada are co-conspirators in this whole regime. The federal government of Canada passed legislation forcing the children into those spaces. We also have the churches that were operating them, and there are really well-documented cases of sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, and indeed death. And in fact, in one case that's currently going on, the Government of Canada is actually fighting against residential school survivors who were shocked in an electric chair in a school in Northern Ontario.
Yeah, really shocking findings there. You know, as I mentioned in my introduction, the discoveries confirm something many people, including yourself, knew. So why did it take so long?
You know, I think that part of the colonial experience here, and it was similar in my visits in Australia, is that the governments and the churches had a propaganda campaign to keep the public in the dark, so that the public didn't know about these deaths and the maltreatment, and weren't in a position to really come forward and really act on it. For us, the stories had to pile up on the public consciousness in a way to really humanize these children and create the type of outrage and public support we see today.
And how many more unmarked graves do you expect to find? And is there a national commitment to this?
It's a really good question that you're asking. In 2015, we had something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission looking at all of the residential school history. Out of that, there was something called calls to action. And that dealt with the finding of the graves. There wasn't a lot of funding provided in order for communities to do that. There are 130 residential schools in Canada where we need to find that information.
And what about the process of identifying the bodies? How difficult a task will this be?
You know, it's going to be a real challenge because the graves are unmarked. We know of stories from residential school survivors themselves of children who were murdered and then placed in obscure places. They would just go missing from the school. So it is going to be a challenge, but it's a challenge that the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities here are committed to being able to overcome. Because we have to find these children, we have to honor them, we have to connect them with their families, we have to have the proper ceremonies. And the other thing that we need to do is end the injustices for this generation of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit kids.
And what about the survivors? I mean, these schools were run till the 1990s. How are they feeling about it?
You know, they're feeling like their truth-telling has finally been recognized. Often when they shared these stories in the past, people thought, oh, that could never happen in Canada. They must be making more out of this than other things. So that's been good, but of course it's very painful, right? To know how many children have died, to see all those stakes in the ground, and to know that you went to school in that place and could have been one of those children.
Yeah, and to my next point then, how will these findings impact on the reconciliation process in your country?
Well, one of the top Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action is for the federal government to end its unequal treatment of First Nations children today. The federal government was supposed to do that by legal order in 2016. It hasn't done it. There's been 19 non-compliance orders against this government. And that unequal treatment is contributing to deaths and unnecessary family separations today. So we see this thread from residential schools in terms of the government's conduct up until today. So we're demanding that the government actually end that injustice too.
Okay, Cindy, Blackstock, really good to get your thoughts on this. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.